What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And, of course, here's your reminder to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch, and you might be watching right now on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined, as always, live from Port St. Lucie, my co-host, Joe DeMeyo. Joe, it's been a great couple of days down here, man. We've really had a good time.
It's awesome. I mean, coming from the cold, Florida sun.
That helps.
Baseball's back. What's better than that?
And let's start right there. Your impressions. We got here Thursday. We got to spend the whole day around the team, around workouts Friday, including, obviously, the pro team, the younger players on the backfields later in the afternoon. A lot of great conversation, but just top-level, surface-level feel. What have been your impressions here down at spring training early on?
The vibes in the clubhouse are high, and talking to players in there, you know, it's just a different feel from the way it's been the last couple of years. And note, I mean, we got here on the day that the news dropped about Kodai Senga.
Right.
You would think that would maybe damper the mood in the clubhouse, but when you talk to guys in there, they believe they're a contender. And I know that fans may or may not agree, but they believe it in that clubhouse.
And I think something we joked about, but it's not a joke, is since this is such a young team and a young clubhouse, because there are a lot of guys on that team that might start out the year in the minors, and their number is going to be called on in a key situation this year for the big league club. You can't be hurt by what you don't know. These are young guys. They're hungry. A lot of them have played a lot of winning baseball in their lives, whether it's at the college level, whether it's at the minor league level. And now they don't look at this as a situation of, hey, what could go wrong again, but rather a situation of, it's my time. And a lot of them, Joe, that we really enjoyed talking with, came through this system together and could come to the big league club in similar time frames.
And they all look at it as an opportunity, like you're saying, Connor. I mean, talking to Vientos and Baty, they recognize the opportunities that are in front of them. And talking to Jett Williams and Drew Gilbert and all the young prospects that are at camp, they recognize that they're coming. And their opportunity to impact the big league team is not that far away. And that's, I think, one of the things that's going to make this season such a fun and enjoyable one.
I think so, too. And while the youth movement is really exciting, we also have to talk about, with a familiar face, that we and every Mets fan really missed last year. Watching Edwin Diaz throw yesterday against Pete Alonso, against Francisco Lindor, you and I sat literally the seat behind home plate and not only looked like Edwin Diaz of old, he looked as good as we've ever seen him throw, which that's a massive catalyst for this team that was missing last year.
It looked like he was not injured at all. The fastball was popping, the slider. If you look at Connor's account on X, Twitter, he posted a video of him just kind of making Pete just flail at a slider. There was a cheer from the players in the dugout when Francisco Lindor rolled over a ground ball at second base against Diaz, because no one was making contact against this guy. So I think that's another reason to have some optimism leading in. I don't think fans realize the difference that Edwin Diaz made, because David Robertson pitched well as the closer, but just the trickle effect down the bullpen and the confidence that the guys in the clubhouse have when Edwin Diaz comes in the game, they feel the same confidence that the fans feel when the trumpets are hitting, and they know when Edwin Diaz is in, you know, that's basically game. And it was very good to see, off obviously the long absence, that he looked no different than the Edwin Diaz that we knew that had an all-time season just 2 years ago.
Right, Diaz trying to regain that form from 2 years ago, and another guy in the same mold that threw right after him in Jorge Lopez. He looked really good as well. I think this bullpen actually might surprise some people, not only with the depth that they've signed, but you have a lot of guys looking to whether rebound or playing on one-year deals. And the fact who gets the Mets through the 6th and 7th inning is a massive storyline of this spring and early on in the season. And I think the Mets, honestly, are pretty optimistic about the volume of guys they have to handle those roles.
They are as deep in the bullpen with major league quality arms that all have different arm angles, different stuff. And a lot of times I think some teams will just kind of get a bunch of fireballers or, you know, get a bunch of sinker ballers and have that kind of plan. David Stearns has created a bullpen where, you know, we saw Michael Tonkin throw, and that's kind of like a lower angle sinker elevate. We didn't see Shintaro Fujinami as he had to tend to some family matters back in Japan.
I think it's a visa,
yeah. But Fujinami, I mean, that's the kind of stuff, and Jeremy Hefner and that staff, they're very excited to get their hands on that piece of clay. And the bullpen has a chance to be arguably the strongest part of the Mets team in 2024.
And going back to the young players, too, this opportunity, spring training, what so much of it can be about is them getting a taste of being around the major leaguers, the major league staff. Obviously, Mendoza is a guy that's run a spring training before, so this is nothing new to him just because he's the big league manager of a team now. But getting to see Jett Williams take reps at shortstop after Francisco Lindor, Luisangel Acuna in the infield as well. You just kind of, and then obviously Vientos and Baty trying to improve at third base. You see the depth that the infield has, and Drew Gilbert is here as well, a guy that's going to play a key role in the outfield in the near future as well. This is a great opportunity for them to kind of get that small taste of being with the big league club, because these are guys that, whether it's an injury, whether it's slumping, or they just perform at the AAA, the AA, and then the AAA level, they are going to be here this year. I didn't think any of them looked out of place with this team. No, they didn't look wide-eyed. They didn't look overwhelmed. I know it's drills. I know it's spring training. But that comfort level, and I think confidence is something you and I have really talked about with these young players, Joe, it's pretty evident.
It's incredibly evident. And when you look, and we saw them taking BP, Jett, and Drew Gilbert, fantastic rounds of batting practice. And Francisco Lindor, how much of a leader he is, I think goes completely under the radar. He was helping Jett after every rep. He was helping Luisangel Acuna after every rep. He was helping Brett Baty and Mark Vientos. He doesn't even play their position, but he was helping them. So the kind of leader he is, and you have all this young talent. And when David Stearns talks about giving runway to the young players, everyone just attributes that to Brett Baty is going to get run at third base. Mark Vientos is going to get run at designated hitter, and Alvarez continued development. But that runway goes down to the AAA level, to the AA level, with the Jett Williams, the Drew Gilbert, the Luisangel Acuna, and some of the pitchers that we'll talk about. I think they're getting to the spot now that the depth of the team is going to start coming internally versus relying so much on outside free agency to build just the depth of your roster.
And you make a great point on Lindor. His involvement in every aspect, he's always talking to someone, whether it's a young player, whether it's a coach. There's really no wasted seconds in camp with Lindor. It's wildly impressive, and this is a team that quietly, Max Scherzer isn't here anymore, Justin Verlander isn't here anymore. There's quietly been, I wouldn't say a leadership void, but more opportunity for guys to step up. Lindor is clearly very comfortable here now. I thought Francisco Alvarez is a guy that doesn't look like a 22-year-old out here. He looks like a 30-year-old veteran in terms of how comfortable he is working with pitchers. Obviously, something Steve Gelbs has talked about a lot on SNY. His improvement with speaking English is remarkable for somebody his age and inexperience being here. Alvarez, we can't talk about it enough. It just feels like a mammoth season is coming, and he had a really good season, especially with power. He tailed off in the second half of the year, but the comfort from a leadership and defensive standpoint behind the plate, managing a interesting group of starting pitchers and relievers, would go a really long way for this team, and he just doesn't look out of place at all.
He's always been a confident player. That
Always.
goes back to talking to him when he was in AA, but he commands that pitching staff. You see him working with the pitchers, and I think he's ready for a much more complete 2024 season.
All right, so let's get into, kind of the elephant in the room that we didn't want to open with because that's not any fun. Kodai Senga, going to be out for a while with the shoulder injury. Putting an actual timeline on this is not realistic. I think we could safely set the over-under around Memorial Day, maybe June. We'll see. I mean, he's going to be shut down with his shoulder injury, and then he's going to have to ramp back up assuming he gets healthy. To be honest with you, obviously we can't wait for Senga to be back, but the reality is you have to talk about what's ahead because the Mets have a vital first half of this season, and they need somebody to step up in one of the 5 spots of the rotation that wasn't expected to pitch out of the gate right away. So, Joe, we've spent a lot of time around the young guys here, whether it's Christian Scott, whether it's Mike Vasil. We'll get to that. But I think, and it sounds like when you hear Stearns talk, when you hear Mendoza talk, this is going to be more keyed in on the Joey Lucchese's of the world, the Tylor McGill. This isn't unfamiliar territory for those guys. But now the Mets not only are using them as a bonus, see what you get, whether they're long relievers, whether they're spot starters, AAA starters. One of those guys needs to grab the reins and keep the Mets afloat until Senga is back. There's no way around it. A devastating spring injury.
Yeah, real unfortunate with everything with Senga. But David Stearns speaking, saying, Senga's going to make a bunch of starts for us this year. And I think a lot of people are talking about it as if, season over and he's going to be out until the second half. It seems like all things considered, it wasn't the worst case scenario that it could have been. But it's opportunity for guys. You talk about Tyler McGill. This is the third year in a row that he might benefit from an IL stint, getting him into the opening day rotation. And, of course, the young players, that opens up that opportunity. If the Senga injury keeps him out into, like you said, after Memorial Day, does Christian Scott force his way to take that fifth spot? Does Mike Vasil? Does Dom Hamill?
They
all
sounded
these young
ready.
guys we talked. Oh, those guys, they sound like they're ready, and they realize, too, much like when we talked about Vientos and Baty, like they're cognizant that their time is coming. It's not just, we're having a normal spring and we're just trying to progress. They're like, no, we understand that this opportunity is coming close.
All right, if you're here and you want to come up and ask a question, do not be shy. If you're nice enough to stop by the Mets pod and you want to grab the microphone, go ahead. I see some people pointing at their friends in the crowd. You got to love that. So I wouldn't have to wait. It sounds like we'll get a question right away.
Why wait?
If you want to jump on, ask the mic, just say your name, say your question.
Big fan of the pod, by the way, guys. I have a question. Of all the minor league pitchers, my name's David.
All right.
All the minor league pitchers in the system, which one's going to make it to the big leagues first this year?
Joe, if I had a dime for every time you had this question out on the field from people, because it's a great question. People are wondering because they're all grouped together. It feels like between Hamill, Scott, and Vasil, those are the three you would say. Who do you think it is?
For me, it's Christian Scott, and I think conventional wisdom is it's going to be Mike Vasil because he pitched in AAA already. Christian Scott, to me, is just he's a different level than the other pitchers in the system. His ability to command 3 pitches, and he told us he's got a new sweeper. That's what the cool kids are doing nowadays. So he's bringing a sweeper into play, and his ability to not just throw strikes but throw good strikes, I think, is going to help him find his way to the major leagues first. And it could be as early as, we're talking that Memorial Day time frame. Like, I have an expectation that you're going to get that same runway that David Stearns has talked about from the pitchers, because we've talked about 2025, Connor, and Kodai Senga's under contract. Sean Manaea is, if he doesn't opt out. Other than that, it's a fully open rotation, and the Mets need to know if and how many of these young players can take those spots leading into next offseason.
Thanks, David.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Love it.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. All right, keep them coming. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Come right up. Ask a question on the Mets pod, of course. I guess why we're in the in-between stage here, Joe. Maybe some early thoughts. We haven't seen a ton of Mendoza around, but he's obviously spoken to the media. It just feels like there's an actual comfort level because, like you've said, he did this for the Yankees. He doesn't feel he knows the New York market, even with a big blow of an injury early on. He just doesn't really seem overwhelmed by anything around here, and it helps that there's a lot of pros on this staff, as we've noticed as well, around him.
Confident guy. You could tell, I think he feels he's been waiting for this job for some time, and he is physically, mentally prepared for it. Like you said, back with the Yankees, before he was the bench coach, he ran the entire spring training and put everything together for the Yankees. So he knows how it works on the backfields, on the main field, and I think he's at the point now where he's confident in his ability to lead this team. And, man, I'll tell you, people are vibing to Carlos Mendoza really well. We've heard from folks in the clubhouse that said just the different feel he brings. It's an open door with Carlos Mendoza, and players just have access to him. So I'm excited about what Mendoza could bring in his first year with the Mets.
All right, we got another question from a familiar face.
Yes, hey guys, I've seen you at QBC a few times.
Yes.
I love your show. Do you think with a lot of money coming off the books after this season, do you expect a more active offseason with some big names? Obviously, Alonso coming up for free agency, the Juan Sotos, some of the big pitchers like Corbin Burns. Do you expect that that's part of Stearns and Steve Cohen's plan to, improve this team going forward?
Joe, for me, it's a confident yes. I think next offseason, you nailed it. There's a lot of money coming off the books. Obviously, they're still paying from a lot of the trades they made last year as well. The Alonso hopeful extension that everybody wants, but I think it's deeper than that. I mean, it's the worst-kept secret that Juan Soto is going to free agency no matter what happens with the Yankees this year. You brought up Corbin Burns. It's a deep pitching class. Yeah. We've said on this pod 8 million times. It's amazing. The Mets have at least 3 open spots going into the rotation probably next year. What do you think, Joe? It feels like it's going to be a peak Steve Cohen offseason in terms of spending after a more tame year this year.
I'll tell you this. It's very fun how fans have progressed. We are at Clover Park for the first spring training game of the season, and we get a question about next offseason.
And we're guilty of it all the time. We do it all the time.
Everyone wants the armchair GM, but no, seriously, I think they built this for next offseason. You kind of look at what the Dodgers did last offseason. Granted, they're a loaded team, but they basically signed J.D. Martinez, and that was it. And they prepared for this offseason where they went all in on Ohtani and Yamamoto. And you saw the Mets go one-year deals basically across the board. I fully expect next offseason to be much more active, much more going after the big fish. And you mentioned the payroll flexibility. Right now they're looking at like $150 million leading into next offseason. So that essentially leaves them flexibility to do whatever they want.
Sounds good to me. But it's still this year, so I'm
Right.
looking forward to
Yeah,
that.
we are too.
We're just at the start. But thanks a lot, guys, for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, I think another thing quietly, too, is this is a year where we're going to learn so much about the young players, and the Mets are going to as well, which opens the door. If you have depth in the farm system, more trades are on the table next year because, hey, this young player is going to fill this role for us, but this guy doesn't have that spot to fill anymore. You don't want to use the word expendable, but a guy that you could put in a trade. It felt like they weren't comfortable moving prospects this year because David Stearns just got here and doesn't know. I don't think that's going to be the case next year.
Yeah, he's using this year to evaluate everything. So that's at the upper levels, that's at the minor league level. He wants to know what he has at his disposal. And like you said, it could open up the door to trades. And when you mention the young players, Drew Gilbert, let's use him as an example. He comes up this year and he performs. The Mets can say, okay, we have our center fielder for 2025. Right. So they need to know with these young players who's a part of the 2025 team and what spots do we need to go use the money, use the trade chips to, really turn this team around. Because, look, while the expectations externally are lower this year, I don't think that's how David Stearns and Steve Cohen want to operate for very long.
All right, let's keep the questions rolling in. I like the sun hat.
Thank you so much. It's going to blow away. I don't like looking this. It makes me look wimpy, but you gotta do what you gotta
It doesn't make you look wimpy.
My name is Alan Kruger. I'm a fan since 1976.
All right, Alan.
Known as Shirt Man. I live down in Port St. Lucie now.
Nice.
I actually was the fan who spoke with Mr. Cohen on on President's Day on Monday. So I called him over. I was yelling out, "Hey, sign Alonso, sign Alonso," and he says, "Excuse me." I said, "Alonso, number 20?" And he smiled.
He's pretty good.
And then I said, it's on YouTube and all that. And he said, "Well, let me tell you something." But you didn't hear that part on it. He says, "Alonso is part of our family. I will try every way possible to sign him." But the media. The media wants it to sound like I was hostile to Mr. Cohen saying, et cetera, et cetera. So Mr. Cohen is the nicest gentleman. He's very cordial. He was polite to all the fans. And I give him the highest recommendation. Just please sign Alonso.
Alan, we are with you, man. Everybody wants Pete Alonso to be a Met for life. And honestly, sounds like you're somewhat confident. Joe and I have been confident just because he goes to free agency. We saw this with Brandon Nimmo.
Honestly,
doesn't mean
I'm
he's
not
leaving.
Confident.
You're not confident.
No,
Why is that?
It's 50-50 because once he goes he's going to be traded because he's not going to sign during the summer.
Okay.
Because that's good
What
business.
if the Mets win?
What if the Mets are hanging around in a wild card
What if
race?
the Mets are
You
playing
can't
well?
trade Pete Alonso if the Mets are hanging around in a wild card race.
Who's going to protect Alonso in the lineup?
That's a golden question.
Only McNeil? First of all, they're not going to put the DH behind Alonso because then Alonso will have a poor year, and he'll tell the manager, "Hey, if I have bad numbers, I'm leaving." So they will put McNeil after, but they got to sign Martinez.
All right.
He has to have
a lot of
somebody.
fans want J.D. Martinez.
But
We've heard plenty of
I'm
chatter
only
about that.
50-50
All right.
optimistic because if he goes to Chicago, I know. Oh, I do that down here. I'm always on TV. And I keep talking, and I tell them they're doing a great job.
Thanks, Alan.
But either way, if he goes to Chicago, he could hit 50 home runs every year.
He could, and he could also hit 50 home runs for the Mets. So,
No.
All right, Alan's not as
Thank you all.
confident.
Yeah.
Who protected Pete Alonso in 2019? Nobody in this crowd probably can answer. Still hit a ton of home runs. I don't know. I'm a little bit more optimistic.
Yeah, look, if the Mets want to keep Pete Alonso, we've said this on the show. If they want to keep him, they can keep him. And Steve Cohen, by all accounts, seems confident that that's something he can do. And you cited Brandon Nimmo, and that's certainly a situation that could just simply repeat itself.
I think, and we say this all the time, but it is worth repeating. If Pete Alonso goes to free agency, Do you think Scott Boras, who represents Pete Alonso, is not going to call the Mets to match or top an offer that he gets? And do you think that the Mets are not going to be willing to do that? I just personally find that hard to believe. It's a fear that he goes into free agency and wants to go somewhere else, and that's justified.
Yeah.
But until we hear that Pete Alonso truly wants to be somewhere else, it's not worth overanalyzing.
Yeah,
at this point.
Look, he's going to play baseball for the Mets this year, and he has the opportunity to hit a ton of home runs. Steve Cohen said to Howie Rose, he goes, I hope Pete Alonso hits 55 home runs this year, and he makes the decision, harder for me. I think he's ready to take care of Pete, and it's just a timing thing, and let's just enjoy watching Pete Alonso play baseball.
It's hard to do that sometimes, isn't it?
It is.
All right, you're listening to the Mets Pod, of course, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You could watch on SNY's YouTube channel, and if you're watching live, thank you very much. Or wherever you get your podcast. Joe, let's go down on the farm real quick before we take some more mailbag questions, some of them that we got, of course, on Twitter as well. We got to interview Mike Vasil while we were down here, and that's coming in a later podcast, but just kind of a highlight for you in our conversation with Mike, who just mature beyond his years and I think is going to have a successful Major League career.
No, that's a huge thing. You could tell he gets it at all levels, where he understands the analytical side of things. He talked about the pitching lab, the famous pitching lab that everyone's talking about, and just talking. It's the sensors are on, and they're doing the biomechanics and breaking down. They're like, if you turn your elbow just a little this way, you can add potentially up to 2 miles an hour. He's like, I did it, and magically
he was blown away by it. When you bring up pitching lab, his eyes got kind of wide, and it was the best. I think the most thorough explanation, because somebody that's actually gone through the pitching lab that we've heard so far.
It was definitely thorough, and he, like we were saying just a few minutes ago, and you'll hear that on the interview on a later podcast, he knows that he's on the cusp of the major leagues, and he was forthright in saying, yeah, I completely understand that I'm simply a call away. So really was impressed talking to Mike Vasil, and you all will definitely want to hear that interview here in the next week or so when it drops in the podcast feed.
And our last bit on Down on the Farm, got to talk to Mets Director of Player Development, Andrew Christie. I mean, obviously, those guys, they have so many different young players to get a handle on. But what was cool with the conversation with Andrew was, I felt like he was highlighting a lot of names that don't get that kind of prospect love as much.
Yeah, and that's what, when I talk to people in player development, that's what I want to hear about. I mean, I know about Jett Williams, you know about Jett Williams, and the top guys. I want to hear about the players that we aren't talking about, and he had a laundry list of names, so you'll definitely want to check out that interview when we drop it. He basically said, I could go on for another hour, but I'm not going to. So, and
he knows Joe can too, so we all saved ourselves from
saved us
a 5-hour interview.
Exactly. But he was great to talk to, and he's rose up the ranks. He's been with the Mets since 2018.
Long time.
He started in scouting, and now he's second in command behind Vice President of Player Development Andy Green, and that brings some continuity into a player development system that has a new lead. And I think, look, he came away just very excited about where this organization is heading, and we talked about how development processes have changed since he kind of started over the last few years. So definitely was excited to spend some time with him.
All right, we got some questions from YouTube. The Fundamentals ask, which relief pitchers who are out of options will make the team, and who goes?
All right, out of options. I think we got Sean Reed Foley's out of options.
And he's
Phil Bickford's
kind of
out of options.
Both of them seem to be on the fringe. No guarantee that they're
Michael
on the roster.
Tonkin has no options. I would lean Michael Tonkin because he was an externally brought-in player by David Stearns. He was, I think, one of the early signings, actually.
Yeah,
so I think there's something he saw with Michael Tonkin, and he was a long reliever for the Braves, who were a very successful team. And you bring him in, and he's one of those unique profiles where he can go multiple innings, but he's got that lower arm slot like we were talking about. And what's interesting about him is generally when you hear about sinkers, it's, bury the ball down and force ground balls. Nobody throws sinkers up in the zone more in baseball than Michael Tonkin. And he was able to induce weak contact.
It's usually not a great idea, but he's actually a guy that's made it work a little bit.
Yeah, so he's a cool story coming from, the Atlantic League back in the pro ball and working his way back to the major leagues. So I would say Michael Tonkin amongst the out-of-option guys probably stands the best shot of grabbing a spot in the bullpen.
All right, another one from YouTube. This is from Andy Locke. What are you most excited about seeing in today's first spring training game? For me, Joe, it's Mark Vientos, because this is someone that you'd love if he just takes this opportunity and sprints with it. And spring training, we've learned over the years, there's times where performances can not mean a lot. And then there are guys that carry spring training success momentum into the regular season. He feels like a guy that with a couple big home runs in spring training, that confidence will carry into the actual season this year. So there's a lot of eyes on Vientos as we sit here at Clover Park and hear the yells for J.D. Martinez that I completely understand. But how sweet would it be if Vientos actually can put a little quietness to those?
That would be fantastic. And, we've talked about Vientos a lot. Brett Baty is another one. He had a great segment on Mets Hot Stove on SNY with Todd Zeal and just focusing on the top hand, which we talked about a bit on the show last week. Like, if he's able to have that firmer, stronger top hand, that will allow him to elevate the ball. So I want to see Brett Baty have some at-bats and put the ball in the air because he hits the ball hard. The problem is when things aren't right, he's hitting the ball really hard on the ground, and that's not effective for him. So he's got to start elevating the ball, and frankly, you're going to get the opportunity. The best part about spring training is, Pete Alonso and Francisco Lindor, they play a couple innings, they come out, and I think you're going to see some young players get into the game today. Some of the prospects we talked about, they're on the list of reserves, so we'll see if they make it into the game.
All right, last call here. If you want to come up and ask a question as we get through a couple more here on Twitter. This one from Polar Pete. If the Mets finish around 500 and miss the playoffs, how would you rank them as a free agent destination next year? Even with solid ownership and a new president of baseball operations, who by all accounts seems like the right man for the job, do you think free agents will see us as a top spot to land? Joe, I think this one's simple for me. Steve Cohen's here. Money matters in free agency. The Mets have invested a lot behind the scenes into this organization. How often can we talk about things like the pitching lab? We had a player say to us in the clubhouse, if you can't figure it out here, then it's probably nowhere with the resources they have. And that was not even us really asking about that point. Yeah. I would consider them always one of the top free agent destinations because money matters.
The reality, like you said, money is the driving factor in free agency most of the time. I know a lot of people are focused on Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and he just wanted to be on the West Coast with the Dodgers, and that there was nothing the Mets could have done about that. But largely, with free agents that have spent time in Major League Baseball, they're driven by the dollar for the most part. Like we talked about Juan Soto just a few minutes ago. I mean, that guy turned down $450 million from the Nationals, the team that signed him, developed him, brought him to the major leagues. He wants the most money. So I think that's going to drive a lot of them. But to the point, I think the 500 is a perfect barometer because then it looks like things are progressing and young players came up and they showed something. And I think players will recognize that, okay, this might be a team that's on the come up. And, of course, you present them in the PowerPoints and all the stuff you show them when you meet with them. This is what we could do in the pitching lab for you. This is the stuff analytically we could do to make you better. This is what you do great. We can do this to make you better.
All right, this one from Eric Roberts. Who's the sleeper pick to make the opening day roster, hitter and pitcher?
I don't know if there's really many sleepers.
A true sleeper.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's almost a kind of set team. But if there was a name that I would throw in, because I don't want to just say nobody, then it just implies there's no competition. Max Kranick, the pitcher that they claimed off waivers from the Pirates, grew up a diehard Mets fan, going to Mets games at Citi Field, and got off Tommy John surgery. But prior to Tommy John, this guy that would pitch into the mid-90s, good breaking ball. His Major League debut, I think he had 5 no-hit innings for the Pirates. So I think he's a guy that could be that flex, long man, swing starter kind of guy. And, he was a waiver claim. So if you want to go kind of not expected, I think Max Kranick is going to try to push a guy like Michael Tonkin and Sean Reed-Foley for one of those last spots in the bullpen.
And the tough thing with injury is it's with a hitter is it's predicated on injury. Right. I mean, that's just the reality. We don't really expect a ton of surprises out of the gate. If you had a key back get hurt, we've seen the depth here with Luke Voigt, who had a lot of success at Syracuse last year. G-Man Choi is here. If an outfielder gets hurt, well, then eyes are going to go to Gilbert really quickly, which is the really interesting one. But you don't hope for an injury, you don't predict an injury, and that's the only way the lineup kind of changes. And inevitably, sometime during the season, they'll have to deal with that. This is a fun one from Dan D on Twitter. Is Sean Reed-Foley likely to make the team? Give us an overview of his arsenal. Me and my friend are big fans of his attitude on the mound. This is something that you and I often talk about. Reed-Foley is a character on the mound, but what is he actually as a reliever for this team?
He's a character. I mean, it's fastball into the mid-90s. He's able to elevate it pretty good. He's got a solid breaking ball, and he's the kind of guy that will just be in that competition with the Tonkins, the Max Kranichs for that long reliever spot, and being out of options. It's going to be interesting because David Stern said, I believe it was on Mets Hot Stove, there's guys that we have that are out of options, and you can't carry them all. So, unfortunately, Reed Foley is just going to be in a battle, and there's a bullpen spot or two up for grabs, and there's no reason why he can't compete for one of them.
All right, another one here, Joe, because we talked about the importance of, Baty really coming out of the gate hot after a really tough season. This is from Second Shot. Could Baty's weak contact problem be as simple as he's failing to stay back and allowing his front shoulder to bleed forward before initiating his swing, or am I just imagining he's doing that? What we've seen on a really good segment with Todd Zeal, and we've read about it and talked about it, is that top hand. Is there anything you've seen with Baty, or do you think sometimes when things are going bad, everything kind of falls out of sync?
That's exactly it. I think the confidence that he had some struggles last year, obviously, and I think the confidence bled into the defense. It bled into all parts of his offensive game, and I think he utilized this offseason as a way to kind of reset, go back to basics, go back to kind of what got him here. And, look, I don't think weak contact is a huge part of his game, to be honest. Like, that question mentioned weak contact. Baty hits the ball hard.
He needs to make contact.
Yeah, that'll help to make contact,
yeah.
But when he makes contact, it's strong contact. And watching him in BP, he's hitting the ball hard. So now we just need to get the ball in the air, and I think you'll see the Brett Baty that we all have talked about for 3 years now.
All right, back to YouTube here from Tommy Jones. Why is Soto a generational talent? I don't think he's a slam dunk over Pete. Soto walks more and has higher average, but Pete has more power. It's closer than people say. I don't know if the combo is pick between them.
Why not both?
Right, 100%.
Yeah. Look, Juan Soto.
And he is a generational talent.
Yeah, what makes him so special, I don't think there's a player in baseball with better plate discipline and knowing where the pitches are than Juan Soto. And he combines that with 30-plus home runs. He combines that with the ability to hit for average. Defensively, that's where, a bit of the questions are. But offensively, Juan Soto might be the most complete hitter in the sport.
This one from Duran Rivera. Joe Connor, do you think if McNeil raises his value, the Mets will trade him next year for pitching and replace him with cheaper, younger minor league prospects? So this one isn't crazy to me at all, as we see how many young players playing middle infield, not only just in general in the system, but with the big league club here in spring training. You don't want to just jump on it and say, hey, they should trade Jeff McNeil. But when you look at being savvy, sometimes it's about thinking a little bit ahead. The Mets have a lot of players that can come up and play second base, whether it's going to be Luisangel Acuna, Jett Williams. You've always said, Joe, he could play literally in the middle anywhere, center field, shortstop, second base. As McNeil gets older and you don't have a lot of trade chips, it's not that crazy, but he brings up a good point. He does have to reestablish his value because his first half last year was not the Jeff McNeil we're used to.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's within the realm of possibilities that McNeil could be a trade candidate, but I would be very cautious with that because he has that versatility. He could play second, he could play third, he could play the corner outfield spots. And as high as we are on these prospects, which one do you feel it's like if you trade Jeff McNeil, you're going to get comparable production right away? Because when we talk about going into 2025, which we want to focus on right now at the first spring training game in this year, but when you look ahead a little bit, the Mets are going to be trying to contend in a big way. So I wouldn't be rushing Jeff McNeil out the door. But sure, if everything breaks right the way you want it to, then sure, you can look into Jeff McNeil and see if you could acquire a pitcher. Because you talked about trades, Connor. That's not necessarily just prospects. They can trade from the major league team as well.
This one from the Rev Heads. If McNeil has another slow start, will second base be open to a Luisangel Acuna? I would think they're going to let McNeil work through whatever he has to, but I'll take this question a different direction, Joe. With no Mauricio this year, it feels like the door is a little bit more open for Acuna to actually have a role with this team at some point, and if Mauricio didn't get hurt, I would say there's a chance we don't see much of Acuna this year, honestly.
I expect you'll see Luisangel Acuna this year one way or another, but maybe it's something where, if Brett Baty doesn't turn it around, you shift Jeff McNeil over to third base. He could play there, and Acuna gets his call-up. But I want to emphasize how good Jeff McNeil is because I think we just had two kind of trading Jeff McNeil, if Jeff McNeil's not good question.
Yeah, it's crazy. Guy won a batting title not that long
Guy won a
ago.
batting title over a year ago. He obviously was playing through the elbow injury. His second half, if you look at those stats, they were a little closer to his career norms. Not 315, but I think he hit 280-something in the second half. So Jeff McNeil, much like we talked about last year, he's just a prime bounce-back candidate. Like, he's got one of the best bat-the-ball skills in the sport. So Jeff McNeil, I think, is going to be okay, and a lot of people are kind of writing him off a little too much.
All right, Joe, I'll close out the mailbag with a question of my own. Jett Williams, the official prospect of the Mets pod. When do we see him in Queens? Is it this year?
I'll tell you, I put in my projections on my top 30, which you can see on SNY.TV. I put 2025. But if you talk to Jett Williams, he says 2024, and he is a guy that has been bet against his whole life because everyone told him, you're not going to be a first-round pick. You're not going to get a Division I scholarship because of your height. So I think he is the definition of he has that chip on his shoulder, and he firmly believes he's coming up this year, and I'm not going to be the one to tell him that ain't happening.
It's bad business, to bet against him at this point. All right, everybody's filing into the park here at Clover Park. Joe, as we wrap up here, just your closing thoughts on our Port St. Lucie trip and a lot of optimism around spring training.
Great trip, optimistic in the clubhouse, around with the players, and look, it's time for baseball. The offseason, sure, there's a bunch of free agents still out there. Maybe the Mets bring in someone for depth or something as we go through here the next couple weeks. But it's time to talk about baseball. It's time to stop talking about, the hot stove season. It's time to stop, looking at it and saying this is how the season's going to go. Starting today, the Mets play baseball, and they're going to be playing 162 regular season games. And these guys seem confident and ready that they're going to exceed the expectations that a lot of us have put on it.
All right, so we're going to see a lot of different lineup combinations in spring training, a lot of regulars, a lot of guys that aren't regulars. Opening day, Joe, and we'll redo this because unfortunately guys get hurt, things happen. Opening day lineup for the Mets this year.
Okay.
And we're seeing a taste of it in the opening spring training game at the top, at least.
Well, DJ Stewart's batting leadoff on opening day?
I was meaning more the middle.
Although
you never know. Maybe Mendoza has a trick up his sleeve that we weren't expecting.
I mean, Brandon Nimmo at the top, I think, is where you start. But I think there is some opportunity throughout the season for him to shift towards the middle of the lineup as he was a mid-20s home run guy. So I think there's a possibility. Second is the weird spot.
That's the one why I asked this.
Is it Jeff McNeil? Is Starling Marte good enough to bat in the second spot on opening day?
He's talented enough. Yeah. It's just a matter if he's available enough.
So I think I'd go McNeil second, Lindor third.
And Pete, that's the easy one.
Alonso fourth.
Is Alvarez batting fifth?
He's got to, doesn't he?
He has to.
Yeah. I mean, if there's a guy...
Where's Allen? That's who's protecting Pete Alonso this year. I forgot to tell him that before he ran away.
Yeah, put Alvarez in the 5 spot, Marte in the 6 spot, and then you have... So Marte, let's go Baty, Vientos, Harrison Bader. Because I think a lot of people thought Harrison Bader was signed to be a part-time player. And the vibe around here, and Carlos Mendoza talked about it, if healthy, Harrison Bader is going to be playing nearly every day. And I think a lot of that is defense, obviously, that Bader brings to the table. And where the Mets need to balance is that run creation and run prevention, and how do we get the best combination of those two factors?
When you lay it out like that, 1 through 6, I mean, you feel really good about.
Yeah.
And it goes to show you how pivotal the last 3 spots are. They're all young players, and that the young players in the system, if they're producing, they're going to be chomping at the bit to get a shot at those spots. So there's going to be a lot to talk about with this team, not just here in spring training, but throughout the actual season as well. Of course, this is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And, of course, subscribe to our show. You will never miss an episode at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. Thank you to everyone that came up and asked a question or listened in to the Mets Pod here at Clover Park at Port St. Lucie. We thank you so much, everybody, and we will talk to you soon.